Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. Turns out it's not just any week. When I looked in my Ramban this morning, I realized it's our 1-year anniversary. We've been learning Ramban together for a full year. We've done the whole cycle of the Torah, which is some cause for celebration, but also, raises the issue, what are we going to do going forward? So the plan is as follows. First of all, the Ramban wrote on tons and tons of things, and I hope to find different Rambans this year to flesh out the Parsha and to flesh out ideas in the Ramban. But second, I reserve for myself the right to revisit really famous Rambans, not to do them again. There's no point in that. I suppose the previous year's shiurim are available online. But to find the major philosophic themes in the Ramban, major themes in Parshanut, major themes in philosophy, and to spend some more time and to revisit those things. Okay, and so if we start in Shelach, and we start in this week's Parsha, so it's hard to not revisit the first Ramban. It's a very, very long Ramban, where Rashi makes the point that the Meraglim was a terrible idea to begin with. And the Ramban says, no, he doesn't think so. Moshe Rabbeinu supported the idea. You know, if asking for Meraglim was a mistake, then Moshe was part of that Aveira. So first of all, it's not explicit in the Ramban, but first of all is the general idea that I get. The Ramban thinks when there are two stories in the Torah, the story, Bishas Maisa, the story Parsha Shelach, which is when it happened, and then the story in Parshas Devarim, which is Moshe retelling 40 years later or 38 years later, the story to Bnei Yisrael, that it's Devarim that controls. That it's the retelling in Devarim where Moshe has access to all the information and he's aware of everything that happened, that's sort of, I don't want to say more authentic, because it sounds like Shelach is not authentic, but the way the Ramban explains it, it's almost like Shelach is Moshe's perspective, Bishas Maisa, in this moment. This is how Moshe saw it. And in Parshas Devarim, it's Moshe's reflection on it, knowing now all that happened in between. It's Moshe's reflection on the Meraglim. And that somehow it's Parshas Devarim that we can rely on more than Parshas Shelach. Okay, that's a general point. But then you get to the specifics. And there are two specific points that the Ramban uses here to make his point, which I think are worthy of pointing out. After the Ramban thinks and explains that Bnei Yisrael have every right to ask for Meraglim, because that's what people do. They want to know which is the way to attack, which is the direction we should attack, which is the easiest way. These are practical questions that need to be answered. Now, when you say to yourself, isn't that a lack of amunah? The Ramban will say no. Ki hakatuv lo yismoch b'chol ma'asav al hanes. And this is a significant point in the Ramban that comes up over and over again. Ein somchin al hanes. The Ramban believes in nisim, and he believes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do what he wants, when he wants, and can suspend the laws of nature. But the Ramban thinks, as a general rule, we, the Jewish people, can't be somech on a nes. And the example I think of all the time is the miracle of conquering Yericho. Okay, we walked around 7 times, it blew a shofar, and the walls fell down. And then what happened? Right? All the people in Yericho didn't die of a cold. We had to go in and stick them with the pointy end of a sword, I imagine. Right? We had to do it. Ein somchin al hanes. Even the most miraculous conquest ever, which is Yericho, and the great miracle of the walls falling down, but lemaisa, we had to go in and do something. And the idea that we're going to sit behind and, not to make it too political, but we're going to say Tehillim, and God is going to kill them all with a disease. The Ramban says, Ein somchin al hanes. It would be wrong. It would be, if I may, un-Jewish to plan that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to help us, that's great. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can do nisim whenever he wants. But we can't rely on them. We have to conquer Eretz Yisrael ourselves back then, and bayamim hazeh, I would say. Okay, so that's one significant point in the Ramban. The second is, according to Ramban's idea, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did was basically co-opt the process. Bnei Yisrael came to God, came to Moshe, and they said, Nishlach anashim lefaneinu, and let's get all the information. Now, how would that normally be done? Two, 21-year-old Shabaknikim go in, and then no one knows anything about it, and they come back with all the information. It's like people come in, the FBI sends people, the CIA sends people, you never hear about them, you don't know anything about it. But God says, no, I want to send 12 people, and I want them to be Rashi B'nai Yisrael. I want to send Nancy Pelosi. She's not a spy. She's 80 years old. She's a senator. She used to be a senator, right? Congresswoman. Okay, sorry. The whole point is, God says, no, I want this to be a public thing. I want every shevet to have a chelek in it. And the Ramban is clear. Why? Because God foresees something bad happening. And he says, maybe I can co-opt this, and maybe if every shevet and I send great people and I send leaders, something good will happen. Now the Ramban knows that it failed. Nothing good came of it. The Meraglim was a complete disaster. And here you see, the limits, I think, in the Ramban's at least telling of it, to God's intervention. Meaning, the ultimate value is Bechira Chavshis. God created a world in which people have free will. And here you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu working, in the margins. He's willing to change, 2 nameless spies for 12 significant spies, or not spies. He's willing to change, a spy mission to a fact-finding mission of the leaders of Bnei Yisrael, because he's afraid of what's going to happen. But beyond that, he doesn't want to cross the line. Beyond that, if we're going to sin, as we did, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to stop us. He can try on the sides. He can try to change the facts a little bit to make it more likely that we're going to succeed. But at the end of the day, God is not going to suspend our Bechira Chavshis. God's not going to save us from our own sins, and we'll have to live with the consequences as we will in this case. Okay, so that's just 2 general points, both the value of Bechira Chavshis and how God is not going to step on that even as much as he wants to. Like, imagine this, he sees what's going to happen, he knows what's going to happen, but Bechira Chavshis is sacrosanct. And second, Ein Somchin Al Hanes. We have to do it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can help, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help, but we have to do it. Okay, now let's turn to Rambans that we didn't see last time. And there are great Rambans in the Parsha. First is Perek Yudalid, Pasuk Aleph. Says the Torah as follows: Vatisa kol ha'edah vayitnu et kolam vayivku ha'am ba'layla hahu. And the people cried that night. So first of all, the Ramban has to explain why that night. So he says, Ki la'eit erev ba'u hamraglim ba'aleihem kasher halchu lifnei Moshe. Meaning, the Meraglim reported to everybody together, and they were in front of Moshe. And so they were limited in what they said. But at night, they went around from tent to tent. Vateiragnu ba'aleihem vatamru bisinat Hashem otanu. Right, they really let the people have it. They really tried to get the people to not go to Eretz Yisrael. Uvaboke ishkimu vayalinu kulam al Moshe ve'Aharon. So in the morning, the people complained to Moshe and Aharon. V'kach omar Moshe vateiragnu ba'aleihem ki bi'ahaleihem hayu omrim divrei nargan. Because the worst parts were said in the tent, not in front of Moshe and Aharon, who remained, intimidating figures. The Meraglim didn't want to take them on directly. V'amur Abotenu, one of the most famous Medrashim ever. Heim bachu b'chiyah shel chinam, va'ani ekva lahem b'chiyah ledorot. Right? They cried unnecessarily, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to turn this day, what day is that? Tisha B'Av, into a day of b'chiyah ledorot. Now, it's a medrash almost all of us have heard of. It's famous. It's true. And the Ramban doesn't dispute it at all. But the Ramban says, V'lo yadati me'ezeh remez shebeparsha tziyozeh. Where does it come from? Right? Chazal saw this pasuk and they said, ooh, you made it a bechiyah, unnecessary bechiyah. God is going to make it a bechiyah l'doros. Okay, but where's the remez? Where does it come from? So first of all, the Ramban says, Mikra Malehu. Right, it's a pasuk in Tehillim. Vayimasu be'eretz chemda v'lo ha'aminu lidvaro vayeragnu ba'aleihem v'lo shamu b'kol Hashem vayisa yado lahem lahapil otam b'midbar lahapil zara. Right? It's a very painful pasuk. So first of all, you have this idea, I think the Ramban would agree with this, that a pasuk in Tehillim is a source. Right? It's a historical source. It means it happened. David HaMelech didn't make stuff up. It means it happened. So it sounds really bad in Tehillim. So he says, Ulai yidrosh zemei pasuk, or it could be from another pasuk. V'tabchem Hashem artem lavazi hiyeh. That the people claim that their children would also not go into Eretz Yisrael. Yomar v'tabchem kashem artem lavazi hiyeh bevo eit bekudatam. So God said, that's what you said? It's true. And it's a subtle point, but it's very significant. Ki ani poked avon avot albanim. Yes, I will bring punishment to the children for their parents' sins, up to a point. Veheveti otam ata sheyedu et haaretz yidiyah bilvad. Because of your sin of the meraglim, says the Ramban, Chazal saw this, that God says, okay, your children will go into Eretz Yisrael, and they'll know Eretz Yisrael. Avalo sheyirshu otalidorot. But their entry into Eretz Yisrael will not serve as the claim forever. V'hakatuv yirmoz b'kiyotze bazeh v'lo yirtze, and the Torah hints at this, v'lo yirtze ligzor ra'ah rak b'inyan tochachat al tenai. But the Torah wants to be careful how to say it. The Torah doesn't want to say definitively, you're going to be exiled. Torah hints, if you're going to sin, if you're going to follow the path of your parents and complain and be bitter to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then what happened in the past is going to happen in the future. And that's the remez to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, both by Rishon and by Sheni. Not necessarily because the Meraglim sinned, but in some way, because the Meraglim sinned and because they spoke about what was going to happen to their children, so God said, fine, if that's your view, then what's going to happen to their children will not be as great. And maybe at this point also, although there's no proof in the Psukim at all, but the sense you get is, had this not happened, as Rav Soloveitchik said, they would have entered Eretz Yisrael, Yemos HaMashiach would have started immediately, and the Melech HaMashiach would have been Moshe Rabbeinu. Now we're going to have to follow a long, long, torturous path that continues to this day. And the sense I get in the Ramban, although he doesn't say it at all, is that at this point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu recognized that Moshe Rabbeinu was not going to Eretz Yisrael. Because if Moshe went into Eretz Yisrael, that would have been the Geula Shlema. That would have been Yemos HaMashiach, and Moshe would have been the Melech HaMashiach. And it's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, as part of the sin of the Meraglim, that's not going to happen. Okay, now, there's a lot of, in fact, my daughter once pointed this out to me. She said, Bamidbar, that's the book where Moshe falls on his face a lot. Right? There's a lot of falling on the faces in Bamidbar, and the Ramban has an interesting take on it. In Pasuk Hey, still in Perek Yudalid, the Torah says as follows, after the big sin. Vayipol Moshe v'Aharon al pneihem lifnei kol kahal adat b'nei Yisrael. And Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces. Okay, now, the sense you generally get, and I don't think the Ramban would disagree with this, the sense you generally get is that when you fall on your face, you're davening. Right? It's like a desperate plea to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Falling down, saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I desperately need your help. But it says the Ramban, not always. And not here. Here he goes. Vayipol Moshe v'Aaron al pneihem. Shera'u shahayu ha'am no atzim la'asot rosh v'lashuv miyad. They saw that the people were going to appoint a leader and return to Mitzrayim. V'kamu hatzadikim v'hishtachavu la'apam arza le'mor lohem al na'achai tareu. Moshe and Aaron didn't fall down b'tfilah. These tzadikim prostrated themselves in front of the sinners, in front of Bnei Yisrael. V'lo tiyeh zot lachem lifuka. Please don't do this. It's a disaster. Al Kain Omar, so the Pasuk says, Lifnei kol kahal adat b'nei Yisrael. The Pasuk's not telling us that Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces and davened in front of Bnei Yisrael, in front of kol kahal adat b'nei Yisrael. On the contrary, Moshe and Aaron literally fell on their faces in front of kahal adat b'nei Yisrael to beg them not to do it. Ki lahem hishtachavu al apam. because it was to Bnei Yisrael that they bowed and that they begged. V'chein vayipol la'apav arza vayishtachu shalosh pamim in Shmuel, right? You have other examples, says the Ramban, where people fall on their faces, not in tefillah, but they prostrate themselves in front of somebody who ki'ilu is more important to them, to make it clear that they're desperate for something. V'tam lifnei kimo lahem. They bow to Bnei Yisrael. V'chein vayelchu gam echav vayiplu lifanav v'rabim zulato. Right, when the brothers of Yosef fall down, it's not in tefillah. They fall down in front of Yosef to make it clear to Yosef that he's superior to them, that he has the power, and that they need their help. So says the Ramban here, it's not what you would think. It's not what I would think. That Moshe and Aharon fell on their faces b'tfilat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes, many times they do that. But says the Ramban, if you read the Psukim, if you look carefully at the Psukim, they fall on their faces here in front of Bnei Yisrael to beg them not to make this terrible mistake that they're about to make. That too doesn't work. Okay, now we go on in the story. And you come to something strange. You come to a subtle tefillah of Moshe Rabbeinu that we notice, but maybe we don't notice enough. Says the Torah, still in Perek Yudalid. First, the argument, right? Moshe says, "HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what if you do this? If you kill them, the Egyptians will say, "Mibilti yicholas Hashem laviat ha'am hazeh el haaretz asher nishba lahem vayishchatem bamidbar." That would be a disaster, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As an aside, both Rashi and the Ramban think it does matter what the Goyim think sometimes. Right? People say, no, we have to do the right thing. Who cares what the Goyim think? Apparently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. Now, Va'ata yigdal na koach Adonai ka'asher dibarta lemor. What did you say? Adonai erech hapayim v'rav chesed noseh avon v'afasha v'nakeh lo yinakeh poked avon avot al banim al shileshim v'al ribeim. Slachna la'avon ha'am hazeh kegodel chastecha v'cha'asher nasas la'am hazeh mimitzrayim v'adheina. And the answer, Vayamar Adonai salachti kidvaracha. Right? So this is a modified form of the Yud Gimel Midos that Moshe is pulling out here, that he learned on Har Sinai, and that Moshe desperately needs now. So first, the Ramban quotes a Rashi, and it's a lovely Rashi because it's almost childlike in its innocence. Umau adibur. Hashem erech hapayim latzadikim v'lo rishaim. Moshe Rabbeinu davens HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, you're slow to anger, both for tzadikim and rishaim. Why? Kisha'ala Moshe lamoro mitzo LaKadosh Baruch Hu she'akotev Hashem erech hapayim. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Shamayim, he sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu writing that he's an erech hapayim. So he says, Amar lo letzadikim. Obviously, God, you're erech hapayim for tzadikim. Amar lo no, af l'rishaim. So God says, no, even for rishaim. Amar lo rishaim yovedu. We don't like Rishaim. They should be wiped out. Amar lo chayecha shetitztarech b'davar hazeh. God says, B'lashon Shvua, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to need this tefillah. Kishechatu ba'egel uv'mraglim v'nitpalel lefanav be'erech hapayim. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'alo amarta li letzadikim. You said, no, it only applies to tzadikim. Amar lo, but v'halo amarta li af l'rishaim. You said to me, Rishaim. Okay? So it's a lovely, lovely medrash, and it's a beautiful story that Moshe couldn't imagine representing and needing this tefillah for Bnei Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu was wrong, of course, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was right. And now Moshe Rabbeinu is grabbing the claim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made in those days, that he's erech hapayim, both to tzadikim and to rishaim. Okay. And the Ramban points out that we refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this context as Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, because that's the Lashon, that's the Midah of Rachamim. Okay? Now, why Midah HaSarachamim here? So pick up in the middle. Vayoma sheyeh hagidula b'kach harachamim ki midat hadin hi shemitucha kinegdam. Moshe saw the Midas Hadin, the Midas Hadin is going to wipe them out. They really are guilty. Right? They really did a terrible sin. There's no getting around the Chen HaMeraglim. It's really as bad as it reads. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't think he could ask for Rachamim. V'hizkir b'midat erech hapayim v'rav chesed v'lo hizkir emet. Right? Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, Be slow to anger. But it's not the complete Yud Gimel Midos. He doesn't say emet. Ki b'midat emet yiyu chayavim. It's a painful line to read. Because Bnei Yisrael were chayav, that's the truth. If God would apply the midas ha'emes, we'd be found guilty. Now, the Ramban is also, he realizes this is the Yud Gimel Midos, but he's matching them up, and he's saying, what's missing? So he says, V'lo yizkir notzer chesed la'alafim, ki lo bizchut avot nitpalel Moshe achshav. He says he doesn't mention the avos here. Why not? V'lo yizkir b'tfilah azot la'Avraham litzchak Yaakov klal, v'hatam, ba'avur sheha'aretz nitna la'avot. Right? The land of Israel was given to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Umehem Yirshua, and we were supposed to acquire it from the Avot. Vehem mordim ba'avotam, but now the people are rebelling against the Avot. V'lohayu chafetzim b'matana shelohem asher ha'avot hayu bocharim b'ma'od. Right? Avram Avinu would be embarrassed by us if he saw Bnei Yisrael right now rejecting the gift of the land of Israel and wanted to go back to Mitzrayim. V'heach yomah shenishpat alahem bach. V'chol haaretz hazot asher etein l'zarachem. V'heim omrim efshenu b'matanazo. And the people were rejecting this gift. So he says Moshe Rabbeinu avoided all references to the Avot because they would have been embarrassed by us. V'lo hizkir v'chata'a ba'avur she'elu mizidim u'poshim. It's just going to remind God of how bad we are. But the sense you get is that Moshe Rabbeinu had a very difficult time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu here, because he really thought we were guilty. V'lo yadati lama lo hizkir rachum v'chanun. So Ramban admits, I don't know why rachum v'chanun isn't here. Those seem like appropriate things to ask God for, right? To be merciful to us, to help us. Ulai yada Moshe k'yadin matuach alehem v'lo yimcho lo'olam. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the facts are so bad that asking for rachmim isn't going to help. Lachein lo bikesh rak arichut apayim shelo yimitem ki'ish echad v'lo yishchatem katzon ba'midbar she'amusu b'magefa. So basically, Moshe Rabbeinu, in the Ramban's telling, is not asking God to forgive us, because he knows that's impossible. But he's asking for erech hapayim. He's saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't wipe us out completely. Don't punish us with a magefa. Don't do any of those things. Maybe, lama yamru mitzrayim. Maybe that's part of it. But he's arguing, just not a punishment all at once. Uba'avur shelo bikesh ata ela arichut apayim amalo salachti kidvarecha. It's an unbelievable diuk, but slightly depressing to us. Right? The pasuk, Vayomer Hashem salachti kidvarecha. When we say it on Kol Nidre, that's what we want. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu, salachti kidvarecha, forgive us as you forgave us back then. But the Ramban thinks that didn't happen. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have the guts. And Moshe Rabbeinu perhaps was correct to not ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for complete forgiveness. We didn't deserve it. We weren't those people. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, salachti kidvarecha, I'll give you what you want. What you've asked for is erech hapayim. What you've asked for is for me not to punish all the Jewish people immediately, for me to take time, for me to give it a period of time, which was at least 40 years, maybe more. And so it dawns on me that when we say salachti kidvarecha on Yom Kippur at night, we're not passing like the Ramban. We mean salachti kidvarecha. We want Moshe Rabbeinu to have asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu for complete forgiveness, not just for suspension of the punishment, as the Ramban goes on to explain that in Unkelus, the word, the shoresh, samach lamed ches, means like suspension of the punishment. It doesn't mean something inherent. It doesn't have anything to do with tshuva. It has to do with just, when I bring a carbon, the punishment will be suspended. When I do tshuva, I'll be forgiven completely. So here, and obviously in the psukim, right? V'ulam chayani v'yimalek kvod Hashem es kol haaretz. Yes, I forgave you, but the Ramban seems to be right in the psukim, right? And when we use the pasuk for davening on Yom Kippur, okay, we mean it in a different context. But here the Ramban says, salachti kidvarecha. I'm forgiving them, not completely, but the way you asked for it, Moshe Rabbeinu, a less than complete forgiveness, but some kind of suspension or delay in the punishment, so that Bnei Yisrael can try to do tshuva, and so that Bnei Yisrael exist, right? If he's going to wipe them out, that would be the original plan. He's going to make Moshe Rabbeinu a nation on his own, something Moshe Rabbeinu had no interest in, something, thank God, that didn't come to pass. Okay, so that's fascinating also, that the Ramban sees here not a complete forgiveness of Bnei Yisrael, and he doesn't even think Moshe Rabbeinu asked for it. The Shelach kidvarecha, I'll give you what you want, which is more time, which is a suspension of an immediate punishment, but not the forgiveness that ultimately we would want. Okay, let's finish quickly with a happier Ramban. Beginning of Perek Tezvav. Says the Torah, immediately after the story of the Meraglim, well, after the story of the Ma'apilim, which is a sad conclusion of the story of the Meraglim, Vayidra Hashem Moshe lemor, Dabel b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, ki tavo el eretz moshvotechem asher ani noten lachem. Right? And the Ramban, like all other Mefarshim, wants to know, what's Nisachim, what are Karbanos doing? What's the flow of the Parshios here, that immediately after Chet HaMeraglim, we have the Karbanot, or we have some portion of the Karbanot. Here the Ramban says something that I think Rashi mentioned, other Mefarshim say, but he says it on his own, and it's worth reading. Says the Ramban, Achar shehivtiach et habanim sheyavo el haaretz. Once HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the children, no, you're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, Hishlim lahem Torat HaKarbanot sheyakrivu nisachim b'vo'am la'aretz. He gave them the mitzvah of nisachim. Why here? Says the Ramban, V'ulai haya ze'ata l'nachamam u'lahafticham. It could be unrelated. It's just a source of nechama. Ki hayun no'ashim le'mor mi yodea ma yihiyeh la'arach yamim l'sof 40 shana. Who knows? Maybe our children won't go into Eretz Yisrael. V'im yechetu gam abanim. Maybe the children will sin and they won't go in at all. V'lachein ra'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'nachamam. Ki bitzavoto otam b'mitzvat haaretz hivticham shegalui lifanav sheyavo'u v'yirshu ota. Right? Says Ramban, the main point is, Ki tavo al eretz moshvotechem. It's one thing for God to say, you're going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. Yes, the parents sinned, they're going to die in the midbar, but the children are going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. But there's something more immediate, and you feel it. The pasuk just says, Ki tavo al eretz moshvotechem. I'm giving you halachos now that apply only in Eretz Yisrael. That's got to be a comfort to the people. They have to say to themselves, okay, it's clear we're going to go in. And it's more meaningful because it's not just a promise. It's a fact. God is saying, Ki tavo al eretz moshvotechem. Here are the halachos that you need to know. Right? It's fascinating. And it's here because it's a nechama. Because after the tragedy of Chet HaMeraglim, God wants the people not just to be promised that their children will enter Eretz Yisrael, but to start learning halachos as if they're in Eretz Yisrael now. And skipping to the end of that Ramban, V'hishlim o Torat Kohanim v'tziva la'chala. Why chala? Okay, it's true. It's also a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, sort of. But so are trumas u'maisros. And the Ramban points out something interesting, that the flow of the parashas is, no, you're going to enter Eretz Yisrael. So why didn't they give other mitzvahs tluyas ba'aretz? So he says, V'yesh od shinui b'chala dat rabotenu. No, because it's a different halacha that applies to chala. Shenitchayvu b'chala kishenichnesu la'aretz miyad. V'lo nitchayvu b'masrot u'b'truma el la'achar yerusha v'yeshiva. Trumas u'maisros and most standard mitzvahs tluyas ba'aretz only apply after Sheva Shachalku v'Sheva Shekivshu, 14 years later. But chala applies immediately. Chala is a transition from man the second you go into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore chala gets mentioned here along with the Nisachim to make the point that as soon as you come into Eretz Yisrael, these halachas are going to apply, and to make the more subtle but significant point, which is, of course you're going to go into Eretz Yisrael. Of course, Chet HaMeraglim was a terrible sin for which we and Moshe Rabbeinu are going to pay dearly. But ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring us into Eretz Yisrael. Ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to bring our children, or we who live in Eretz Yisrael now, are going to bring us into Eretz Yisrael. And I know that because of the Nesachim, and I know that because of the mitzvah of Chala, and I know that because of the history of the Jewish people and the world that we live in. Okay, Yashkoch to everyone. That's it for this week. See you next week. Shabbat Shalom.